Guys, I hate to break it to you, but hackers are getting more sophisticated every year. Luckily, you can get protection from NordVPN with a single click. I am a loyal NordVPN customer, and with the fastest VPN on the planet, I never have to slow down because of my connection. But NordVPN is more than your standard VPN. You can stay safe with threat protection, which shields you from malware, trackers, and ads. Now, with NordPass Password Manager, they can make your digital life simpler by keeping your password close at hand. And with the premium feature, the data breach scanner, NordVPN will scan the internet and make sure your sensitive data has not leaked. Now you can purchase both NordPass and NordVPN at the same checkout. One account protects up to 6 devices, and with a 24/7 customer support, their advanced software is unbeatable. Try NordVPN risk-free with a 30-day money-back guarantee. Go to nordvpn.com/Sonnen. And to commemorate NordVPN's 11th birthday, you're going to get a mystery gift. Or just click on the link below. So a few important things to learn about Jon Jones from this last week. The victory helped, right? None of this stuff happens if you don't have a victory. Jon Jones has been largely dismissed in this sport. How come? How would that be? When people come up with the greatest ever list, I personally cannot remember the last time that I was in one of those or even observed one of those when they gave anytime somebody gets, who's the greatest fighter of all time? I've never heard anybody give an answer. I just haven't. I've never heard anybody say it's this fight. Who's the greatest fighter of all time? And then that person will say, and it'll put out 3 names, right? For whatever reason. They'll never just say Anderson Silva. They'll never just say the correct answer, George St. Pierre. They give a few names. But ever since they've been doing that, everyone that I've ever heard, Jon Jones gets included. But he gets a little bit dismissed in the sport. Why is that? Have you ever thought about that? How come there's not headlines about Jon Jones, except in the forums, except in the threads? How come when he's not fighting, if he's not in handcuffs, he's not in headlines? What other top guy have you seen healthy and in his prime that sat for 3 years and the fans didn't come and beg him to come back? We've seen guys sit, but we've never seen them not be asked by the fans. We've never seen a mandate. We've never seen the online petition, if you will. How come? Why is Jon held out? The answer is because he doesn't involve himself in the sport. He's very much absent of this sport. First off, because he's so good. And this very thing happened to Roy Jones Jr. He got so good. Boxing didn't welcome Roy in. He was so good, it excluded him. It put him into a different category. And Roy had to work really hard to make sure that he stayed part of that community. Roy was coming in, he was announcing fights. I mean, Roy was doing a lot of stuff. He started Roy Jr. Promotion, which was nothing more than that, but he was showing he was involved. Bringing the amateurs, getting them licensed, bringing them over to the pros, getting them deals, working them up the undercard, showing up at events. It was a really big deal that Roy did that, and it saved his career. It was a really smart thing that Roy did. But let me just give you an example. Jon doesn't do a lot of that. I don't think the reason you don't see Jon in the media is because the media doesn't have a topic or they don't want to cover him. It's a give and take, right? Very simple politics. If you're really big, if you've got enough, if you've got a story big enough, the media will come out and cover it. For them, not for you. If the story's good enough, but the rest of the time, the media's got to work every single day. They got to work 365 days a year. You, as a fighter, have to work 3. But the media has to go every day. So on those days, particularly when there's down days, which are very often, you're going to call some of those big-name fighters one time, and you're going to ask them to give you an interview. And whatever their answer is of talk to my people or let's reschedule or geez, I can't do it or flat out no, we're not getting back to it all, you're not calling them back. Not unless the answer is yes. And when those down day comes, you're not going to be writing about them. then there has been enough media who's contacted Jon Jones and asked for a return favor, right? You work 3 days a year. I got to work 365. We're in the same industry. Of my 365, I don't make a fraction of what you do. Could you help me out with an interview? You don't look at it like that, though, right? You're the fighter. You're busy. You're out at the club. Who's this guy? Who's this unknown number? I don't want to take the 2 minutes to copy. It's one of those things. No problem. But just so you understand, and most of them don't, and Jon is in the category of does it, it's going to go both ways. You're not getting the shine unless you got a really good story. Like going out and tapping out a guy named Surreal in the very first round, right? If you got a really good story, we'll go ahead and cover it. And I only share that with you. I feel as though he removed himself. You want to know where that happened? It happened with Ronda. And by the way, I want to get ahead of something. I am not being my typical jerk of a self and giving Jon a hard time. This is about to take a spin. This is a pro Jon Jones piece. But stay with me on this one thing. Jon has removed himself. One, because he was so good at putting him in a different category. But two, because it seemed to support the sport. You're not watching a pay-per-view and all of a sudden, right, out walks the guy, dude's music hits the speakers and he gets in, he's taking his t-shirt off and one of his cornermen is Jon Jones with these white gloves on and putting Vaseline on him. Like, that's never happened. You don't remember a time that there's an interview, there's a fight coming up and there's Jon Jones. You don't remember a time that there's a massive fight and they pan to the audience and there's Jon Jones. And you want to know who else did this? Was Ronda. And the sport was really nice to Ronda. Boy, she was good for clicks, and they'd write the stories. Whether they could get her, they had to go pilfer and steal it. They would write the stories. But the second she exits stage left, quit coming to a ring. She would go on Ellen DeGeneres to build up her own fights. That's great. That's really good stuff. But when it's done, she wouldn't do it for anybody else. She wouldn't go in there just to build the brand. She wouldn't go in there to build the next pay-per-view. She wouldn't go in there to build the division. She wouldn't go in there to build women's MMA. She didn't go on there at all to help anybody ever, as soon as it wasn't helping herself. But I'll just share with you, this gets observed, and nobody's going to speak about it. Nobody's going to say it clearly like I just did. One, they don't have the courage, but two, they just don't have the rhetorical skills. They're just not going to say it, but they will, believe me, not write about it. They will ignore it. They will move on as though that period of time didn't happen. So it's very important what Jon has done this last week. Jon Jones, he did one of his most memorable and most important things today. You want to know what that was? Jon Jones was asked who was going to win between Pierre and Adesanya. Jon Jones answered the question and he gave an analysis. But what he does within that is he now endears himself and ingrains himself into the fabric of the sport. The very sport that one of the greatest fighters ever. 3 years healthy, nobody begging him to come around, all sorts of opponents, nobody begging him to come back. That's just never happened before. It didn't happen because they didn't know if he'd hear it. They didn't know if he followed it. They didn't know if he appreciated it. They didn't know if he was coming. They didn't know if it mattered to him. I can tell you that straight up as a guy that covers Jon Jones. I didn't know if it mattered to him. I didn't know if he was following it. I really didn't. I don't see him at events. I don't see him weighing in. I don't see him patting other guys. I don't see him saying, oh, I got a great fight tonight, right? Conor McGregor's king of this. All the time. Red Panda Night is still real. Conor is still king. But if there's a pay-per-view, he's putting it over. He will be on Twitter, even if he's stealing some shine for himself. He will let the world know that it's happening. He will give back to the sport. You hear a story, and I realize that it's being disputed, that Conor got 3 guys bumped to get 3 guys in. That's good stuff. That's not bad. That's good stuff. That's giving back. You always give back. You always get your own guys. You always look out. You always help the team. Unless you're at an arm's distance and you're not involved in the sport, even if you're just really good at it. And by the way, in case you're curious, you want to know what Jon Jones said about Pierre and Adesanya? Now, you got to remember, too, Jon Jones and Adesanya do not get along. I mean, to the point that Adesanya moved up to 205 pounds looking for Jon Jones. That ended up not working. He came back down to 85. But they don't get along. So take that into account, if you will. Jon took Pierre, but he gave an analysis. So I can't say it was just sour grapes. He gave an analysis, which was very good because Jon said sometimes a guy's just got your number. He said, I could be wrong. I'm pulling for Pierre. I think Pierre is going to do it. We'll see in April. That's good stuff. He told people when it was going to happen. He talked about the history of them. He showed that he understood it. He showed that he's part of the sport. He showed that he follows the sport. Which when you keep your distance or you don't return those phone calls or you don't do those interviews or you don't try to put anybody else over other than yourself, it's a two-way street. It's a real two-way street. And you will work 3 days a year, and if your story's good, it'll get covered. But they're going to work 365, and believe me, they're going to leave you out of it.